So here we are in Matthew chapter 22, starting at verse 15 and down to the end of the chapter, verse 46. And let me just offer you kind of a 10-minute coach on some things you might look at if you'd like to spend some more time in this text, or maybe you're going to lead a little discussion on this with your family or with your life group or just a gathering of friends. What are some of the things that would be additional to what I talked about on Sunday? So whether or not you were there Sunday, let me just kind of give you a quick overview. There are 4 questions that are posed starting at verse 15 by religious leaders, 3 of them by religious leaders, intended to trap Jesus and to shame him publicly, intended to try to show the superiority of the Pharisees, the Sadducees. Those are the groups that are involved here. And you could do some digging if you'd like on even who are the Pharisees. Just Google that question. Who are the ancient Jewish Pharisees? Or who are the ancient Jewish Sadducees? You'll get all kinds of really interesting reading if you'd like to. But if you were just to kind of stay with the text here, that first question is around giving to Caesar what is Caesar's. This idea of, is it okay to pay taxes? This was a corrupt government. Part of you would say, look, who wants to pay for a government that tramples on human rights? Well, they didn't have any choice in it. It was a dictatorship. It was enforced by military offensive. We live in a democratic society, so this raises some questions for us. Well, what are our responsibilities as people who should be voting, should be politically aware as we exercise this right and this freedom to affect government, to determine who will be government. It's a great responsibility, it's a great privilege, and with it comes some questions about corrupt government. Listen to what Jesus has to say on this subject as he says, look, give to God what is God's. As he lifted this denarius, this Roman coin that the Jews considered to be blasphemous, as he lifted it up in the temple, surely to the gasp of all of those there, but he does several things. He says whose image is on it, his image of Caesar. He doesn't say this, but inferred whose image was Caesar made in. There's something else that's kind of interesting here. They're really frustrated and concerned about this blasphemous image as he holds it up in the temple in Jerusalem. This enormous, ornate, elaborate, beautiful structure that had been made to the glory of God, made as a place to worship God. And he's saying, give to God what is God's. Now we're going to come back to this because it kind of comes full circle by the time we get to the question Jesus poses to them. We come to the second question, which the Sadducees, the Pharisees have been beaten, they strike out. Sadducees step up to the plate. They come in then, and they're trying to be tricky with this question about the woman who was married, her husband died, no children, the brother married him. This was levirate law from the Old Testament. The idea trying to protect the woman, trying to protect the family heritage of the man who's died. And they create this scenario and try to trap Jesus. And their point is, it's absurd that there is a resurrection, because how could she, at the resurrection, be married to all 7 of them? The Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. They don't believe in angels. They don't believe in anything that they don't think can be demonstrated in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And Jesus demonstrates to them, number one, you don't know your scriptures because from Exodus, the 2nd book of the Bible, he demonstrates that the idea of resurrection is completely reasonable, and it all hangs on the tense of the words. Verse 32, chapter 22, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Present tense. If they were dead, if they were gone, if there was no life after death, it would have to be past tense. I was the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Okay, do you understand that? Hopefully you get that. But then there's this other question that is there, and and that is, how well do you know Scripture? Because, man, if we don't know Scripture, we can really get messed up and create all kinds of confusion, get all kinds of confused ourselves. There's the second accusation: you don't know the power of God. They didn't even have faith to believe that God could do the resurrecting. Jesus demonstrated that he could. Jesus was resurrected. You and I will be resurrected as followers of Jesus, those who are found faithful. The power of God. The third question then around this idea of marriage, they didn't even understand what the afterlife would be like. Marriage is for this life. What's coming after is even better. There might be that might raise some questions for you. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 verse 9 would be a place that you might go to dig a little deeper. Romans chapter 8 verse 18. Paul tells us that he says, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed in us. A couple of passages of Scripture that might be helpful to you. As you're opening Scripture and trying to dig through, I don't know what kind of Bible you have. It might be NIV, NLT, ESV, King James, or New King James. Many Bibles will have kind of a column down the center here, or maybe it's notes along the side that are intended to kind of give you some footnotes that you can then dig a little deeper. This study Bible, it doesn't have study notes, but it's got this kind of column in it. It gives me the opportunity to say, oh, look at that, verse 41, there are some other passages that the editors that have put the Bible together for me have said, hey, you might want to read that as well. Consider looking at that. The third question then is the question that's posed to Jesus: what is the greatest commandment? And if you've been at OAC very long, you have heard me reference this before. He goes to the Shema, Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. And then he goes on to say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. That's a summary of the first 4 of the 10 commandments that comes in Deuteronomy chapter 5. You could read through the 10 commandments. Chapter 5 verses 8 to 9 are particularly being addressed here, and that would be some good backup for you to do. You could also go to Galatians chapter 5 verse 13 and 14, where Paul talks about this idea of the greatest commandment and what it means to live representing Jesus in loving one another, the second part of what Jesus says here. So that's question number 3. Question number 4 is posed by Jesus back to the Pharisees who have gathered here, and it's around the idea of the Messiah and whose son is the Messiah. And he's going to Psalm chapter 110, just looking at the first verse, but you could read the entire psalm. It's a messianic psalm penned by David, and it anticipates, from David's perspective, 1000 BC, it anticipates the coming of the Messiah. But how could David speak of the coming Messiah as both his son and his Lord? You'll read it yourself here, verses 41 through the end of the chapter, and the point that Jesus makes is the Messiah had to be more than a mere human being. And you can reflect on that, pray about that, understand it, and maybe check out a few related verses such as Psalm 110. I think that's about 10 minutes of coaching on this passage of Scripture, Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 through 46. I pray that that God would meet with you as you open this text, whether you're by yourself or with your life group or your family, and that in reflecting on Scripture, reviewing Scripture, digesting Scripture, memorizing Scripture, you would be growing in your faith as a disciple of Jesus, and in knowing the Scriptures, you would understand God better. Bless you in this inquiry into God's truth.